Alright lads, welcome to another one of my vehicle reviews. Whether you're a new subscriber or a long time viewer of this channel, thank you very much for stopping by. Today we're going to be taking a look at the WMA 301, a rank 6 Chinese light tank. This vehicle is located at battle rating 8.3 in arcade, realistic and simulator battles. To unlock this tank, you'll have to fork out 8,730 golden eagles. China is well known for its cheap products, but this is by no means one of them. After you seize all the capitalist revenue and actually buy this vehicle, you'll have to put it in your lineup for the cost of 10,000 silver lions. You can also purchase the expert and ace qualifications for this tank, costing 790,000 silver lions and 2,000 golden eagles respectively. We then come on to the repair cost, and you have a pretty low 4,770 silver lion repair cost. This makes the tank very affordable to play, as you aren't having to fork out that incredibly high repair cost for each time you die. Moving on to the rewards, and in realistic battles with a premium account, you'll have a reward modifier of 642% and a silver line modifier of 450%. This gives you a higher silver line modifier than the T69, but the T69 has a higher reward modifier, something to keep in mind. In this review we're going to be covering the mobility, armour and firepower of the tank before finishing with a conclusion. Alright, moving on to the engine and performance, and the WMA is powered by an engine producing 320 horsepower. Combined with the vehicle's weight of 19 tonnes, it gives this tank a power to weight ratio of 16.8 horsepower per tonne. This isn't amazing for a battle rating 8.3, but remember, this is a wheeled vehicle, not tracked. Meaning regardless of the engine power, you can still use or get up to a pretty high top speed. Speaking of which, in realistic battles, this tank can get up to a top speed of 84 km per hour in going forwards, but only a measly 8 km per hour in reverse, which is a true weak spot of this tank. Your acceleration is pretty good, and with that high top speed you can nip in and out of cover, but that poor reverse speed means you are quite limited on a battlefield, because if you get caught short or in a sticky situation, there's just nothing that you can do really, and the tank does feel painfully slow when trying to retreat. Something also worth mentioning is the fact that this is a wheeled vehicle. I touched on it earlier, but there is more in depth to it. This uses a 6x6 chassis, but it has 4-wheel steering. The front and rear set of wheels both steer independently, meaning your turning circle in this tank is actually incredibly low. Obviously not as good as a track tank, but very good for a wheeled vehicle. This does make the WMA feel very nimble. The driving feels smooth, and you don't feel sloppy and heavy like you do in some other tanks, like the Ruicat or the Rodkampfwagen 90. Overall, I did enjoy playing this tank. It's fast, nimble, and while it is a little bit let down by its poor reverse speed, the tank just drives like a dream. It's super fast and accelerating, and it turns on the spot. It has a driving engine more like that found in World of Tanks than typically found in War Thunder. This is actually an incredibly good tank to drive. You can just weave in and out of city blocks, and it's fast enough for in the open country as well. So 10 out of 10 for mobility on my part. Alright, so moving on to the armour and survivability, and this tank is a crew of 4 men, with 1 in the hull and 3 in the turret. This tank does have a weird engine layout, as the engine is in the middle of the vehicle. You have a driver at the front, and the rest of the crew at the rear. This means in a side profile shot, around here will most likely kill the tank instantly, but around at the hull, it stands a pretty good chance of not killing the vehicle outright. You will be left with a hefty repair though. So moving on to the arm performance itself, and to do this we're going to be using the 105mm gun found on the TAM. This is pretty much the standard NATO 105mm gun. Starting as always with the lower frontal plate, and we have only 20mm of effective protection. This is basically mincemeat. Moving upwards it drops down again down to 15mm. This is again absolutely abysmal, so you're not going to be winning any contest for the most heavily armoured vehicles. As you can see, this tank is basically just a tin can on wheels, but we'll get on to the rest of this shortly. Moving up to the turret, protection is slightly better, up to around 51mm here as you can see, and a little bit better on the upper frontal plate. However, I suspect that is mainly due to the angling of the vehicle. The very harsh angle is on the side of the turret. Again, you do have around 96mm in places, but again, against the heat effects or high explosive rounds, you're just going to go straight through this. So this tank from the front is going to be basically a laughing stock of anything above battle rating 2.0. If we turn the camera to the side of the vehicle, then just like the front we have basically nothing. 8mm flat down the side here, which is, you could basically punch through it. Going up to the turret, non-critical at the very back, that's quite surprising, you thought there'd be ammo up there. Again we have 26mm on the side of the turret, drops down a little bit on the front. In the rear of the vehicle again, flat turret, flat hull. 17mm, 8mm, so again. There's not really any point giving you advice on this tank. You can't exactly angle or do anything to improve your survivability. You're going to be incredibly vulnerable to overpressure, so high explosive rounds, artillery, you're basically going to have to avoid them at all costs. Luckily, as we've covered already, this tank is pretty snappy. Use that acceleration and mobility to keep yourself out of danger. Alright ladies and gentlemen, we now come on to the good part of review, the firepower, and this tank is armed with the 105mm WMA 301 cannon. A very catchy name as you'll agree. The gun is fully stabilised in both the horizontal and vertical planes, and you can carry 30 rounds in total, with a first stage ammo rack of 9 rounds. Pretty standard so far. We then come on to one of the biggest weaknesses of this tank, and that is the terrible vertical guidance characteristics. While you have a pretty good 18 degrees of gun elevation, you have a terrible 4 degrees of gun depression. This seriously limits your ability to go hull down in this vehicle, as well as using ridge lines in general. As I said, this is up with the reverse speed of being one of the biggest weaknesses of this vehicle. Moving on to the reloading is under the loader section, and we have a base reload speed of 8.7 seconds, which drops down to 6.7 seconds with an ace crew. Moving on to the targeting is under the gunner section, and we have a base turret rotation speed of 18.2 degrees per second, which rises to 26 degrees per second with an ace crew. This is fairly slow. I would like it to see a little bit higher myself, but it is certainly workable. Moving on to the modifications, and I'd like to point out that this tank gets access to a laser rangefinder, as well as high resolution thermal imaging. Moving on to the ammunition, and our stock shell is a Type 83 heat shell. This is a high explosive anti-tank fin stabilised round, and travels at 1173 meters per second. It contains a TNT warhead of 1.27 kilograms, giving it 400mm of penetration at 90 degrees. This is pretty bog standard, and should only really be used against light vehicles. We then move on to the DTB-1 shell. This is high explosive variable timed, more commonly known as a proximity fuse warhead. This has an arming distance of 500 meters, meaning a plane or helicopter that you wish to target must be more than 500 meters away from you for the proximity fuse warhead to actually fuse and detonate. The shell itself travels at 825 meters per second, which is pretty slow, and only contains a rather weak 1.6 kilograms of TNT. While this is pretty good for a 105mm round, in the grand scheme of things, it isn't really a great high explosive round. And at battle rating 8.3, most planes travel far too fast for high explosive VT shells, although they can still be used against helicopters. Like most other 105mm guns in the game, you do have a HESH round, and once again, the Chinese gave it a very creative name. This round is also called the Type 83. It travels much slower at 730 meters per second, and contains a TNT warhead of 4.3 kilograms, making this round capable of penetrating 127mm of armour at all ranges and all angles of attack. We then come onto a shell which isn't called the Type 83, shocking I know. This is a GP-105. It's an anti-tank guided missile with a tandem warhead, meaning it is able to defeat explosive reactive armour. While this sounds great on paper, it's usually only Soviet and other Chinese vehicles which use ERA at this battle rating, with a few exceptions such as the American M60 TTS. It travels at 370 meters per second, pretty fast for an ATGM, and contains 4.62 kilograms of TNT. This high explosive warhead, combined with 750mm of penetration, make this missile one of the most lethal ATGMs on the battlefield, as it has high penetration, a tandem-shaped warhead, and high post-penetration damage. I've seen many players using this missile as the main round on this tank, and not our next shell, although I'm not too convinced. We then come on to the final round, which I'd say is the go-to round for this vehicle, and once again, it's called the Type 83. This round travels at 1455 meters per second, and at a range of 1000 meters against armour angled at 30 degrees, is capable of penetrating 272mm of armour. This is kind of just a DM23 clone, the main round found in the German Tetri around battle rating 9.0. While good at battle rating 9.0 in the German Tetri, it is outstanding at battle rating 8.3, and can easily defeat even the most heavily armoured opponents at battle rating 8.3, and is still pretty capable of battle rating 9.3, a full up tier. Apart from the main cannon, this tank does have a rifle caliber machine gun mounted coaxially, as well as a 12.7mm machine gun mounted on a pintle mount, fired by the commander. Before I get into the conclusion, what do you guys think about this vehicle? And what plane, tank or ship would you guys like to see reviewed next? For the price tag of nearly 9,000 golden eagles, this certainly is a very big investment, but an investment that I think is well worth it if you are serious about grinding out the Chinese tech tree. I've previously done a video on the T69TG, and I wasn't too pleased with it. It felt slow, with a below average gun, while the WMA 301 is fast, mobile, and highly powerful, with high penetration ammunition and high resolution thermal imaging, addressing my biggest gripes in the T69 video. While both the WMA and the T69 have poor reverse speeds, I feel like this can be overlooked slightly. Yes, the 4 degrees of gun depression is a big issue, as it does severely limit your ability to actually fire the damn gun. Most maps in War Thunder aren't even, and you will find yourself on ridgeline about 90% of the time, so it is a big issue. You'll have to know your maps well to be able to use this gun depression effectively, but the tank is by no means bad. If you're an average Joe player that isn't really too interested in the Chinese tech tree, then I wouldn't recommend getting this tank. While it is a good premium, I just don't feel you're missing out on it too much. On a 50% off though, I'd definitely say get this tank. If you do want to grind the Chinese tech tree however, I would highly recommend the WMA. It is by far the best premium in the Chinese tech tree at the minute. The T62 number 545, although not on sale anymore, is absolutely a piece of shit. I'm not even going to sugarcoat that, it's just absolutely awful. The T69 2G, you know, it's a decent little medium tank, it's quite slow. Got a high power gun, but it's got a very long reload. It just doesn't really feel in the meta at the minute. But the WMA, as I've said, it's fast, it's nimble, it's highly powerful, and with those high resolution thermals, it's potent even in top tier matches. I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money lads, but I'd say that this is a solid investment if you are serious about the Chinese tech tree. If you did enjoy this review, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing. And once again, whether you're a new subscriber or a long time viewer, thank you very much for watching lads, and I hope you have a great night.